Professor P. Chalmers has studied river life since the first half of the last century. Her field guide, Anomalies of the Red River, was well received by potamologists of the upper Midwest. In 1934, when she was researching rumors of a mythological creature in southeast Missouri, she discovered the skull of a mudmaid on the north side of the Kentucky bend of the Mississippi River near New Madrid. The finding of the skull initiated her lifelong search for knowledge into the still murky history of the Mississippi Mudmaids. The skull is the most treasured artifact of what became the Mudmaid Museum, a collection of Mudmaid-related artifacts, including written accounts of encounters, carvings, pottery, sporting souvenirs, and much more. The Mudmaid Museum reveals an alternative history, a museum filled with artifacts from when mudmaids were encountered in the American waterways and the lore that followed. Join us as we go in search of Mississippi Mudmaids. The Mudmaid Museum has a number of impressive prehistoric artifacts in the collection. While combing the shores of the upper Mississippi, Chalmers was jubilant to come across this small stone mudmaid effigy. This is the oldest relic in the museum collection, having been dated circa 650 Common Era, and establishes a long history of mudmaids in the Mississippi. Over the next 50 years, Chalmers continued to add to the collection with artifacts uncovered in Illinois, within the territory between the Mississippi and the Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site, across the river from modern-day St. Louis. Cahokia is the site of a pre-Columbian indigenous American city of Mississippian peoples, circa 600 to 1400 CE. This settlement was the largest and most influential location of the Mississippian culture during the late Woodland period. They were accomplished craftspeople, creating sophisticated stone, wood, and clay artwork. The carvings that Chalmers acquired for the museum collection, along with the mudmaid decorated pottery, firmly establishes the connection between the mudmaids and the Mississippian people. In 1673, more than 500 years after the peak of the Mississippian culture at Cahokia, Louis Joliet and Père Jacques Marquette, who rarely sat in a canoe, were the first Europeans to traverse the upper Mississippi. But it wasn't until the spring of 1730 that the trapper for the Northwest Company, Auguste Lemaitre, wrote in his journal of his brief sighting of her in the Mississippi River, near what is now Cairo, Illinois, at the confluence of the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers.
It was dusk when we saw what appeared at first to be a small woman swimming in the river on the opposite bank, but from the waist down, she had the body of a fish. After several moments at the surface, she let out a most human cry, dove beneath the water, and was not seen again.
A decade and a half later, and almost a century before John James Audubon published The Birds of America, his ornithological opus, Nils Nilsson authored an encyclopedia of New World fauna and foliage. The only known copy of this compendium of New World nature is in the collection of the Mudmaid Museum. You will not have been able to find an image of a mudmaid included in the 1750 edition of this early naturalist's field guide. However, in this preprint proof from 1745, you can see that Nilsson intended to include his rendering of a classical-inspired mudmaid. The publisher Nicol & Co. removed Nilsson's depiction of the mudmaid before going to press, considering his rendering unbelievable. Ironically, this proof is all that remains of Nilsson's labors, owing to the fact that the glue used in the only printing of the book was contaminated with Leposalis bostricophila, or book lice eggs, making it necessary to destroy every other copy. Over a century and a half later, Otto Bernard, a student of Jean-Charles Develey at the Sèvres porcelain factory in France, learned about the possible existence of mudmaids in America and created a small prototype for a porcelain clock depicting a mudmaid lounging. This design circa 1803 never advanced into production, but the original remained in the collection of the Develey family until it was acquired for the Mudmaid Museum in 1986. Sadly, Otto Bernard could only imagine the Mudmaids, whereas Foster Ballantyne, who spent his life on the river, was a lifelong friend of the Mudmaid he called Elsie. Ballantyne and Elsie are pictured here in one of only 2 known photographs of a Mudmaid. In it, she wears a dress that is now in the collection of the museum. This dress was worn only this once, as it was made of too many layers and became too heavy for mobility when immersed in river water. Ballantyne was from Natchez, Louisiana, and was a man in love with the mighty Mississippi River. As a young man with ambition, he worked his way up from first mate of a rear wheeler to the Commodore of the Star Riverboat fleet. And it was as Commodore he christened a grand new side-wheeler, the LC Mudmaid, for his friend. About 7 miles east of the Mississippi in southern Illinois, where there are rich deposits of the raw kaolin required for the production of pottery, the Kirkpatrick brothers, Cornwall and Wallace, built a pottery in Anna, Illinois. It was these brothers who were initially credited with the creation of a jug decorated with the image of a mudmaid, a map of the Mississippi, and the words, "Little jug flow like mighty Mississippi," in cobalt, that is a significant artifact in the museum collection. After a preliminary sketch by Samuel McGowan was discovered in the museum archives, this jug is now understood to be the creation of a rival pottery family in the conjoined town of Jonesboro. Brothers George, Thomas, Samuel, and William operated McGowan Pottery. Very little is known about this family, other than they operated for a short time out of this stone pottery studio in Jonesboro, where they produced illustrated crocks and jugs, such as the one in the museum collection. Another mystery in the museum collection were the horns that were regularly found on Mississippi riverboats. These horns baffled scholars until recently, when a letter from Miss Jane Bell to her cousin was discovered deep in the museum archives. In the letter, Miss Bell recounts an event from her journey up the Mississippi on a side-wheeler.
As the sun dipped below the horizon, and the evening cast its enchanting glow upon the dark waters of the mighty river, we saw a sight that was beyond belief. A small woman, with no legs but the tail of a fish and whiskers, swam alongside us. Once she was sighted by the captain, there was a great commotion as quick orders were made, and the first mate rushed to equip himself with a horn. Alice, you should have one day the opportunity to hear such a sound. The mate winded the instrument with one long note for what seemed like an age. I learned from the captain the horn is sounded to keep men from abandoning ship, and even so several young men succumbed to her song.
Miss Bell's account is substantiated in the diary of a Miss Maud Edgar, where she writes that without a blast of the trumpet, both sailors and passengers could be enraptured into leaping over railings and into the river to cavort with a beckoning mudmaid. For those who could swim, it was merely an inconvenience, but for those who could not, tragedy. With an ever-increasing flow of river traffic on the Mississippi, St. Louis was destined to become the 4th largest city in the U.S. by the late 19th century. One of her residents was entrepreneur Herbert Arthur Henry, who made his name developing a number of mustache conditioners, oils, and waxes. Henry was a consummate showman, and by promoting his products with the mustache-like whiskers of the Mudmaids, was able to amass a fortune selling his exclusive formulas to uncompromising gentlemen. This lanky strap of a Mickey Dazzler often appeared in his own advertisements, as in this one originally published in a 1907 issue of Popular Mechanics, and now in the museum collection. Around this same time, potter Emily Alexandria Brady gained slight attention for showing a pair of incised jars at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in the Palace for Fine Arts, now the St. Louis Art Museum. Brady worked alongside Adelaide Alsop Robineau at University City Pottery in St. Louis, while Robineau created what is credited as her masterwork, the apotheosis of the toiler, informally known as the Scarab Vase, now in the collection of the Everson Museum of Art in Syracuse, New York. Brady greatly admired Robineau and after seeing her award-winning scarab vase for the Turin International Exposition of 1911, she endeavored to pay homage to the beau ideal by creating her own mudmaid and river-adorned vase entitled, "In Veneration of My Mississippi," now in the collection of the Mudmaid Museum. During the height of the St. Louis Exposition, and 10 years after French aristocrat Pierre de Coubertin initiated the revival of the ancient Olympic Games, he was able to establish the inclusion of the arts in the sporting competition. So in 1918, artist Samuel James created this maquette of a mudmaid for the 1920 Antwerp Olympics art competition. However, the maquette is all he would complete, as James, a World War I veteran and workers' rights advocate, traveled to Winnipeg, Manitoba, to participate in the Winnipeg General Strike of 1919. For 6 weeks, the strikers brought the economic activity of Canada's third-largest city to a standstill. While on the picket line, James fell for a member of the Women's Labour League, a rosy-cheeked shop assistant named Maria Eck. He married her, never returning to complete his submission. 8 years later, and 450 miles southeast of Winnipeg, young socialites, Vern and Dorothea Wallin, after a long night of pink gin and dancing, were compelled to embark on a quest to record the Song of the Mudmaid. And so it was that in the early hours of October 27, 1927, they found themselves in a boat on the Mississippi just north of the Twin Cities with a cylinder recorder. What they captured in the early hours of that morning could very well be the distant sound of a mudmaid. A decade after the Wallins recording was made, and prior to the formation of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League founded by Philip K. Wrigley of the Chewing Gum family, there existed a less formal organization of women's baseball whose membership included the team, the St. Louis Mudmaids. The star players of the Mudmaids were 6 sisters: Edna, Violet, Evelyn, Elsie, Astrid, and Ethel Cedarwall. The team played at Sportsman's Park on weekdays in the summer from 1938 until the spring of 1942, when after the declaration of war by Franklin Delano Roosevelt the previous winter and the signing up of 7 of their 10 brothers for military service, the sisters quit the team and started work at the Niedringhaus Metal Products Company fabricating bombshells. The team couldn't survive the loss of its best players and folded just weeks after the sisters quit. This Mudmaid uniform badge and Edna's glove are the latest acquisitions by Chalmers for the museum, and they are also the most contemporary Mudmaid artifacts uncovered. Chalmers is convinced there is much more to learn and continues to dig for the truth as she goes, in search of Mudmaids.